How can the automotive industry secure the transition to electric vehicles? Several major actors use STIMULUS to define and validate the key component for the vehicle, the battery management system, so as to avoid a classic consequence of natural language requirements. 70% of the errors injected in a project are located in the natural language requirements. Let's see how you can make the BMS specification right first time. Here are the requirements of the BMS, regrouped in several chapters. 3 requirements manage the BMS running mode. 4 requirements manage the request coming from the vehicle. This paragraph manages the safety. 1 requirement defines when we have a safety issue, and 4 others define the action to be performed when a safety issue occurs. Eventually, 4 requirements start or stop the battery cooling system to prevent a too high temperature. Let's see the system architecture. It has 2 main components. One that will be implemented as software running on an ECU, and a junction box that will physically open or close the battery element's circuits. Here are the requirements for the ECU part, also regrouped in several chapters. And here are the junction box requirements. How can you ensure that this specification is complete and correct? Let's first test the BMS level requirements. We use this test environment. We drag and drop the BMS requirements in the blue box and expose the BMS to a test scenario. Let's see what this scenario looks like. Each of these 3 blocks contains some constraints controlling the input's generation. For instance, this scenario uses a state machine to define a sequence of events, with some indeterminism enabling STIMULUS to generate automatically many different test vectors. Let's simulate the BMS specification. We can perform many simulations easily. STIMULUS will generate various test vectors according to the defined constraints, and we can observe the BMS response and make sure the specification is correct. Let's consider the BMS specification as validated. We can reuse it to check the behavior of the level below. We will use the automatic test campaign functionality. We have a test environment where the object under test is the BMS architecture, consisting in this block diagram. Each block contains the set of requirements we saw earlier. On the right, we selected a set of scenarios constraining the inputs, and for each scenario, the number of test cases that must be generated and executed. Before starting the test, we create an observer in which we drag and drop the already validated BMS specification. The component level specification is going to be validated against the higher level specification automatically. Let's start the test campaign. STIMULUS has detected some violations of the observer. It also reports the coverage of the requirements. Let's look to this execution. The observer has been violated at this moment. Which BMS requirement has been violated by the lower level specification? Just click on the error message. Here is the violated requirement. We can go inside the components, for instance junction box, to check where the error is coming from. At the moment of the error, 2 requirements are active, the others are in gray. The vehicle sent a message, "Close request," so it is probably this requirement which is erroneous. Indeed, we open the mainline minus instead of closing it. Here is a version 2 of the junction box requirements where the mistake has been corrected. Let's drag and drop the V2 into the junction box and restart the campaign. This time, no violation is observed. The requirements at the component level satisfy the BMS level requirements. We made our specification right first time with STIMULUS. Developers will receive a specification that is very clear, complete, and correct. Once they have developed some code, we need to verify if the code behaves as expected. Just compile the code, drag and drop it into the ECU block. That's all you need to do. Restart the test campaign, this time testing the implementation, and we can observe that the code meets its specification. STIMULUS is also an amazing functional tests automation tool. Try STIMULUS.